Designed by George Ivatt, LMS Ivatt tanks were introduced between 1946 and 1952. All built at Crewe, they were classified by BR as mixed traffic locomotives, built to replace the older worn-out tank engines of the LMS. While based on a Stanya 262, it was noted that Great Western had already produced a fleet of small prairie locomotives, which had worked successfully as mixed traffic locomotives in their region, working branch lines in the area. When commissioned, most of the locomotives were allocated to the LMS, with a few being allocated to the Western region after nationalisation. The last 30, however, were destined for the Southern region, to work for various branch lines around the region and occasional pilot work. Some of the class were modified to be capable of push-pull operation, and a tender version of the class was also built. Occasionally they were used as banking locomotives, which assisted heavier trains up steep inclines. The banker would not couple onto the rear but simply push the train, which would negate the need to stop and uncouple. Though it did always help if the banking locomotive managed to keep up with the train it was supposedly assisting. During their time on the Southern region, they gained the nickname Mickey Mouse tanks due to the placing of route indicator discs either side of a smoke box that then looked like ears. 41312 was built in May 1952 and spent its entire working career on the Southern region. 41312 was first based at Faversham and then Ashford in June 1959 before she moved on to Barnstaple Junction, where she worked over the Torrington branch, putting in some appearances on the Ilfracombe and Exeter line. In March 1963 she was reallocated to Brighton. In 1964 she moved to Bournemouth, where she worked over the Swanage and Lymington branches. 41312 performed the last steam service on the Lymington branch in April 1967. The last 3 months of her career were spent at Nine Elms, moving empty stock trains between Waterloo Station and the carriage sidings at Clapham Junction. She was finally withdrawn from service on the 3rd of July 1967, 6 days before the end of Southern Steam. 41312 worked her way to Salisbury Shed for storage, prior to being sold to the Wooden Brothers and taken to Barry Scrapyard. The Loco was then purchased from Barry Scrapyard in August 1974 by the Caerphilly Railway Society, and became the 63rd locomotive to escape the scrapyard and the cutter's torch. Following a limited amount of restoration during the early 1990s, the Loco was purchased privately, and she moved to the Watercress Line in 1995. Over the next 4 years, 41312 was restored to full health, and for a short time operated a number of trains on the main line, including Alton to Ascot shuttles, and also running on the Metropolitan lines during the Steam on the Met celebrations. Due to having small water tanks, holding a mere 1,350 gallons, and being a Class 2 locomotive, the engine was not able to work for normal 10 to 11 coach trains that you could usually expect to see on steam rail tours. The wheel size also restricted the Loco to 45 miles an hour. As such, this makes the possibilities of mainline use very limited and not commercially viable, and the certification was allowed to lapse. This meant 41312 would be confined to heritage railways, which is by no means as bad as it sounds. You see, unlike lots of big engines you find on railways, which are very much caged lines because they were designed to go about 60-70 miles an hour for 50 miles to 100 at a go, the Ivatt wasn't designed to do that. It was designed for stop-start work with small, lightish trains compared to the others, which is exactly what you find here. From operational perspective, if you stick 4 coaches behind it, it will quite happily take it up a 1 in 60 gradient, or 5 coaches if you're feeling keen and fancy a challenge. From a crew perspective, the engine is brilliant. The cab is really well laid out and quite spacious for a small engine. And it rides really well, and is not very hungry with regards to coal. There is no doubt in my mind this was a brilliantly designed engine. From a ride perspective, it had pony trucks at the front and rear, so it would guide the engine into the curve and out of it no matter which direction you were going. You'll find lots of engines will only have a front pony truck because they were designed to really only go forwards. From a driver's perspective, it was really easy to prepare. oiling points and greasing points, nearly all outside, where they're easy to reach. Okay, there's a few underneath, like the axle boxes, but compared to other engines, this is brilliant. From a fireman perspective, they had new features like rocking grates, which would allow you to rock the fire and drop the fire down into an ash pan, which is easy to empty. This makes your life easier in the morning when you're preparing, and easier to drop the fire should you need to. The ash pan is easy to empty, and the ash pan itself essentially is a hopper underneath the fire where all the spent coal drops down into. And what this does essentially is stop you setting fire to half the temperature. At the front, they had a self-cleaning smoke box, which was a fantastic idea because you then didn't need to get really grubby and dirty at the end of the day when you really just want to go home. Fantastic engines these are. The Ivatt tank really does fit in beautifully here. And in 2019, the owner sold the Loco to the Watercress Line. And just like that, the Ivatt found its new home here, at the Mid-Hants Railway, the Watercress Line.